Welcome to the Biblical Perspectives for Leadership podcast, where timeless biblical truths meet modern leadership. We are thrilled to have you join us on this journey of exploring how biblical principles can guide us in leading with wisdom, integrity, and purpose. Whether you're leading in the church, your workplace, or your community, this podcast is designed to inspire, challenge, and equip you for the road ahead. Let's dive into today's conversation and discover how Scripture shapes the way we lead.
Welcome back to Biblical Perspectives for Leadership.
It's great to be back.
Imagine finding out that the biggest threat to your organization isn't, your main competitor or a sudden market crash.
Right, the external stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But what if the biggest threat is actually the very people standing closest to you in the room?
Oof, that's a terrifying thought for any leader.
It really is. And today, we are looking at why leadership proximity absolutely does not equal loyalty.
Wow, yeah, so true.
And why managing a crowd is fundamentally different from, leading a committed team.
Right, there's a massive difference there.
So whether you are walking into a tense boardroom, stepping up to lead a ministry, or, simply trying to guide your own family through the complexities of daily life, today's deep dive into the provided material is designed specifically for you.
And what's fascinating here is just how universally applicable these ancient dynamics really are. I mean, we were looking at a historical account of the story of the Passover, right? A moment of extreme crisis and sudden deliverance.
Yeah, intense pressure.
Exactly. But the instructions given to Moses and Aaron, they aren't just ancient survival tactics. They are literally a masterclass in organizational psychology, boundary setting, and identity formation for newly freed people.
And our core mission today is tackling the absolute hardest part of that identity formation. Yeah. We're going to focus heavily on the vital leadership mandate of creating consistent standards and, avoiding double standards.
Oh, man. That is a trap every single leader falls into at some point.
Absolutely. But the story we are reviewing today provides a really rigorous framework to navigate it.
It does.
And just a quick formatting rule for you as you listen along with us today.
Good call.
As we go through the story, we're going to state the specific biblical chapter and verse. So, for example, we will say, chapter 12, verse 42. We are absolutely never going to use the words period or point when referring to Scripture.
Right, just to keep things super clear and anchored directly to the text.
Exactly. So let us jump right in. Because the foundation of any leadership standard, it has to start with institutional memory, right? Remembering your why.
That is the absolute bedrock. I mean, before you can ever hope to enforce a standard or lead a team effectively, you have to deeply understand the foundation of your own authority.
Right.
So if we look at chapter 12, verse 42, it states, "It is a night to be much observed unto the Lord."
Okay, let's unpack this, because that phrasing is just so intentional. A night to be much observed.
It really is.
This narrative insists that Israel's freedom didn't happen just because, Pharaoh finally got tired of the plagues or the political climate shifted.
No, not at all.
It happened because God kept watch in the middle of a literal nightmare.
Exactly. Deliverance wasn't luck. It was direct, divine intervention in an otherwise completely hopeless scenario.
Wow. Yeah.
And the practical instruction from the material is to heavily document that exact moment. Keep a written record of answered prayers. Share those family testimonies at the dinner table. Mark those spiritual moments, not just standard birthdays.
Why is that so critical, though?
Because institutional memory is incredibly fragile. When a company or a family moves from a state of crisis to a state of stability, what happens? Our immediate human instinct is to credit our own resilience.
Oh, sure. Our own strategic brilliance, right?
Exactly. We start believing our own hype.
But I have to push back on this a little bit, or at least, explore the friction here.
Sure, go for it.
In modern leadership, and frankly, just in everyday life, we are taught to celebrate crossing the finish line.
Right, we love a victory lap.
We do. We ring the bell when the IPO hits. We pop champagne when the project ships. But this story demands we fixate on the specific night we were watched over, the actual pain point.
Yes.
Why is institutional memory, dragging ourselves back to that darkest hour, so crucial for leading yourself and others into the future?
Well, because celebrating only the finish line creates this dangerous, almost intoxicating illusion of self-sufficiency. Remembering the darkest hour, and specifically remembering the protection you received in that pain, It strips away leadership arrogance.
That makes a lot of sense.
If you forget the crises that tested your organization and the grace that sustained you, you lose your grounding. The life lesson here is stark. If you forget what God brought you through, you may fail to praise Him for what He's doing right now.
Wow. So a humble leader remembers they were rescued.
Precisely. And a leader who remembers they were rescued, well, they lead with a completely different kind of empathy and moral authority than a leader who thinks they bit the whole ship themselves.
That completely shifts the perspective. It grounds you in reality rather than ego.
It really does.
And once you have that humility and you remember who delivered you, you realize something else. Just because you were delivered does not mean you're entering a lawless utopia.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Freedom actually comes with intense, profound boundaries.
Let's look at chapter 12, verses 43 through 45, which outline the ordinance of the Passover.
Right, this is where the tension really ratchets up. The instruction here is highly exclusive.
It is.
It dictates exactly who may and may not partake in the covenant meal. A foreigner or a temporary resident could not just wander in and participate without a covenant relationship.
So God placed a strict, impenetrable boundary around what was considered holy.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the way we tend to operate today is often the exact opposite of that.
Oh, 100%.
We treat access as a universal right. It's like someone demanding access to the corporate vault just because they walked into the lobby.
Right, just because they like the architecture.
Exactly. We would call security immediately.
We really would.
Yet in our everyday lives or our church lives, we somehow think deliverance means zero rules and casual access to sacred things.
Right.
We kind of forget the covenant responsibility.
That vault analogy gets right to the heart of the psychological mechanism at play here, which is value assignment.
Value assignment.
Yeah. Human beings fundamentally do not respect or value what they can access casually.
Wow.
True. Deliverance was completely free and unearned, yes.
Yeah.
But the covenant relationship that follows carries immense weight. The Passover wasn't just a neighborhood block party.
Right. It was a sacred identification.
Yes. If you allow casual, uncommitted participation in the most sacred elements of your family or your organization, you actively degrade the value of those elements. You teach your people that the core mission doesn't actually matter.
So how does a leader actually navigate that friction? How do you effectively teach your team, or your kids for that matter, that God is loving but also unmistakably holy?
It's a tough balance.
It is. Because how do you show that experiencing true freedom actually requires reverence? Right now, the cultural narrative is basically that any boundary is inherently oppressive.
Right. You navigate it by demonstrating that a boundary is actually the ultimate expression of love and preservation.
Okay.
I mean, a loving parent doesn't let a toddler play near a cliff. The boundary is what keeps the freedom safe.
Oh, that's good.
As a leader, you have to clearly define what is sacred. What are the absolute non-negotiables in your culture? God's love invites everyone in, absolutely. But His holiness requires us to respect the difference between mere participation and true surrender.
Right. The life lesson from the material is that you cannot live any kind of way and expect holy things to mean something to you.
Exactly. If you treat the sacred as common, it loses its power to transform your life.
Which perfectly sets up the hardest part of the equation, right?
Yeah.
Defining who is actually on board with that transformation.
Yes, the boundary lines.
Because recognizing the sacredness of a space naturally forces a leader to ask a much harder question. Who actually gets to be in that space?
Right.
This brings us to chapter 12, verses 46 through 49, and this deals with commitment over proximity.
This raises such an important question about this difference between just standing nearby and truly belonging. The instructions here detail that participation required a visible physical identification with the covenant, specifically circumcision.
Right.
Geography wasn't enough. Just living within the borders of Israel did not automatically make you part of the covenant community.
Let me pause right there to underline that.
Yeah.
Because that is huge. Just living among the people didn't mean you belonged.
No.
You couldn't just, coast on the fact that your tent was pitched next to Moses.
Right, exactly.
There had to be a visible, costly sign of commitment. Stop depending on family history or a church title or just a religious routine.
And the psychology behind that is fascinating. It's like the ultimate application of the sunk cost principle, but in a spiritual context.
How do you mean?
Well, when a person undergoes a permanent physical marker of identification,
Mm.
their psychological commitment to the group skyrockets.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
God welcomes people from all backgrounds.
Yeah.
I mean, the story explicitly mentions the stranger and the foreigner,
Yeah.
but he never welcomes them without requiring transformation.
Right.
You cannot ask for the promises of a covenant while totally rejecting its responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
A leader's job is to lead people into covenant, not just manage crowd participation.
Okay, but let me throw a real-world leadership dilemma at you.
Let's hear it.
Isn't it incredibly tempting, almost intoxicating as a leader, to just count the sheer numbers in the crowd,
Oh, absolutely.
rather than demanding a visible sign of commitment? Like, if I have 10,000 followers online, or 500 people in my corporate division, or a packed auditorium on a Sunday, it looks like success.
It looks great on paper.
Exactly. And asking for a costly commitment risks driving those numbers down. So why is settling for mere proximity such a fatal error?
It is a fatal error because of the bystander effect.
Okay.
When a crisis hits your organization, an uncommitted crowd doesn't just passively watch. They actively drain the energy, the morale, and the resources of the committed remnant.
Oh, man. They drain it.
Yes, a crowd scatters at the very first sign of friction. The life lesson here is that proximity to God's people is not the same as personal commitment to God.
Right. Proximity does not equal commitment.
Exactly. When you demand a visible sign of buy-in, you are effectively filtering out the tourists.
Filtering out the tourists. That is brutal, but incredibly necessary.
It is. If you only manage crowd participation, you're just running a social club. But if you lead people into deep, shared sacrifice, into a true covenant, you are building a resilient legacy.
And once you have that committed remnant, you face the absolute crux of today's deep dive.
Yes.
The ultimate test of leadership integrity. Because if commitment is required of everyone, the rules governing that commitment must be identical for everyone. Let's look really closely at chapter 12, verse 49.
This is the crucible right here.
Yeah.
Chapter 12, verse 49 says, "One law shall be to him that is homeborn, and unto the stranger that sojourneth among you."
One standard for all.
Perfect consistency.
Hmm.
God does not create a lower standard for some and a higher standard for others.
So, what does this all mean?
Wow.
I mean, in theory, it sounds noble, but this is the absolute core focus of what we are talking about today. Let's look at how this actually plays out. A double standard in a workplace or a home is like rot in the foundation. It destroys trust instantly.
It really does.
But I have to challenge this from a highly pragmatic standpoint.
Okay.
What if enforcing that one law bankrupts us? We see leaders constantly bending the rules for their high performers or their favorites.
Oh, all the time.
Right. The top salesperson who brings in 80% of the revenue gets away with totally toxic behavior. Or the insanely talented creative director gets a pass on their character flaws.
Yep.
How does a leader actually survive enforcing one law when the stakes are that high and the rainmaker threatens to walk? Why does God strictly prohibit this?
This is exactly where you have to decide what kind of leader you actually are.
Oof.
Bending the rules for a high performer replaces principle with pragmatism. And the very moment you do that, you are broadcasting to your entire team that your stated values are fake.
Wow.
You're telling them that performance is your true master. Sure, you might save the quarterly revenue, but you lose your moral authority.
And once moral authority is gone,
It is nearly impossible to regain. The team will never fully trust your decisions again.
because God's truth doesn't change depending on the person.
Precisely. God prohibits double standards because his house operates by his nature, which is uncompromisingly consistent.
Right.
He does not let popularity overrule principle. And he certainly does not bend biblical convictions to fit public opinion.
And in everyday life, this is just as potent. In parenting, if you are not consistent with values and expectations, like treating one child's infractions differently than another's, you breed deep resentment.
Absolutely. Maintaining one standard is excruciatingly hard. It might cost you that top salesperson. It might cost you a friendship.
Yeah.
But avoiding double standards at all costs is the only way to protect the integrity of the mission itself. A leader who operates with one law creates a profoundly secure environment.
Because people know exactly where they stand, even if they don't always like the rule.
Exactly.
It requires a terrifying amount of courage to stare down a situation where looking the other way would be so much easier and deciding to hold the line anyway.
Yes, it does.
One law shall be to him that is homeborn, and unto the stranger. No exceptions based on talent or utility.
And when a leader has the courage to establish and maintain that secure environment, it paves the way for the final phase of this story,
Which is
how the people actually respond.
Yep.
Which brings us to obedience and moving into destiny.
right. When a leader establishes one consistent standard, the only proper response from the people is unified obedience.
Yes.
We see this in chapter 12, verse 50. It says, "Thus did all the children of Israel, as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron, so did they."
Notice what isn't in that verse.
What's that?
There is no debate.
Yeah.
There is no focus group testing the nuances of the Passover ordinance.
Huh. True.
They responded with unified, immediate obedience, and the direct result of that is in the very next verse.
Chapter 12, verse 51.
Exactly. "And it came to pass the selfsame day that the Lord did bring the children of Israel out."
On the selfsame day, the timing was exact, the deliverance wasn't partial or messy, they were brought out as an organized people, not scattered survivors.
That distinction is the key to everything we've discussed today.
How so?
Deliverance should lead to obedience. God's acts are meant to align us, not just amaze us. Escaping bondage is merely step one. The ultimate goal is the movement into a completely new identity.
Right. Escaping a sinking ship makes you a survivor.
Yes.
You're exhausted, and your entire identity is wrapped up in what you just escaped. But arriving at a new shore with a blueprint makes you an organized people with a destiny.
That is a perfect analogy.
So how can leaders help their teams make that realization? That deliverance isn't just an escape from bondage, but a movement into identity.
You do it by fundamentally changing their daily habits. The everyday life application here warns us. Do not mentally return to what God delivered you from.
Do not confuse survival with purpose.
Exactly. A leader has to step in and say, yes, we survived that brutal corporate layoff or that family crisis. But mere survival is not our purpose. Let your new season have new habits, new boundaries, and new obedience.
Right.
Stop separating praise from obedience. True gratitude isn't just saying thanks. It's letting your thank you show up in your choices.
Let your thank you show up in your choices. That is powerful.
It changes everything. Unified obedience to the new standard transforms traumatized survivors into a covenant community.
Well, we have covered incredible ground today. We synthesized some massive themes. We started with the absolute necessity of remembering the nights God carried you.
Right, remembering the why.
Then we unpacked the friction of respecting holy boundaries, recognizing that casual access degrades the sacred.
We explored demanding true, visible commitment rather than just settling for a crowd.
And we confronted the strict enforcement of one consistent standard to avoid double standards at all costs. And finally, responding to deliverance with unified obedience.
It is quite the journey. And if there is an ultimate lesson to distill from this entire story, it is this. God does not just bring you out to make you free, He brings you out to make you His.
Wow. That reframes the entire purpose of our freedom. So as you head back into your boardroom, your ministry, or your living room this week, I want to leave you with this final lingering question to mull over.
A good one.
You've been brought out, and God has established His one standard for your life. But if you're honest, are you still secretly longing for the familiar double standards of your past simply because they were easier to navigate?
Thank you for joining us on the Biblical Perspectives for Leadership podcast. I hope today's insights have encouraged and equipped you to lead with faith, wisdom, and purpose. Remember, the greatest leader of all time taught us that true leadership is about serving others. If you enjoyed this episode and podcast, be sure to subscribe, share it with others, and leave a review. It helps us reach more people with these transformative truths. Until next time, keep leading with grace and walking in purpose.